Blue and red lights flashed across my backyard like fireworks that forgot the sky. The music cut off. The grill hissed. My friends went quiet. Karen from the HOA stood in the middle of my grass with her phone in the air like it was a sword. "Officer, over here," she shouted. "He's breaking a dozen rules." 2 officers stepped through my open gate. One looked at the posted sign by the fence that said, "Private property, no trespassing." He looked at the broken latch on the gate where Karen had forced it. He looked at the little kids near the juice cooler. He looked at me, holding a spatula in one hand and a plate of burgers in the other. "Ma'am," the taller officer said to Karen, "I'm going to need you to." The shorter officer shifted his stance. His hand moved toward the cuffs, and then he turned his head toward me. "Sir," he said, voice calm but firm, "I'm going to need you to." The words hung in the air like smoke over the grill. Everything froze. How did my simple backyard BBQ end up like this? How did Karen, the lady who mailed warning letters for leaving a trash can out for 8 minutes, end up calling the cops on my party? And why was an officer reaching for his cuffs? Let me take you back to where it started. It was Saturday morning. The sun was soft and warm, like butter on toast. I'm Jason. My wife is Emily. We live on Maple Grove Circle. Our little boy, Noah, is 7. He loves dinosaurs, extra pickles, and racing our golden retriever Scout across the lawn. We had planned the BBQ for a good reason. Our neighbor, Mr. Walker, a quiet Army veteran with a salt and pepper beard, had just come home from the hospital. He walks with a cane and smiles with his whole face. He helped me fix my mailbox when I moved in. He never asks for help but always gives it. I told Emily, "Let's throw a welcome home BBQ, simple food, music at a low volume, no wild stuff." We printed small flyers. "Welcome home, Mr. Walker. Backyard BBQ at Jason Emily's, 3-7 p.m., family friendly, come hungry." We slipped one into every mailbox on our street. We even slipped one into Karen's mailbox. Yes, Karen. Karen lives 3 houses down. She is our HOA board secretary. She wears a neat blue blazer even on Saturdays. She always has a clipboard and a pen that clicks too loudly. Click, click, click. At 10 a.m. I was setting up the grill. Noah was tying red and blue balloons to the fence posts. Emily was arranging a table with lemonade, sweet tea, and a big bowl of watermelon. We placed the speakers on a patio chair. I checked the volume on my phone. We kept it at 3. Soft, friendly. You could still hear the birds. I was rubbing spice on the ribs when I heard it. Click, click, click. "Good morning," Karen said, standing at the edge of my driveway. Her smile was thin but sharp. "I noticed your flyer. I wanted to save you a lot of trouble." "Morning, Karen," I said. "We're keeping it small, families, mostly neighbors on this block. You're welcome to join us." Her eyes slid over the setup like a scanner at a store. "Balloons are not allowed on the exterior fence line," she said. "Section 5.3, visual clutter provision. Also, gatherings of more than 10 guests require a 2-week written notice to the board. Section 8.1. "We actually read the handbook," Emily said kindly. "Section 8.1 says that about street parties. Backyard family events are fine as long as noise stays reasonable, and the grill is 10 feet from the fence. We measured. We're at 11. Karen tapped her pen. Click. "There's also Section 2.4 about signs. You posted a sign." I turned and looked at the small poster by the gate. "Welcome, Mr. Walker." I almost laughed. "It's inside my yard," I said. "It's for our guests so they know they're in the right place." She said, like the word was a tiny rock in her mouth. "Also, charcoal grills produce smoke. Smoke travels." She sniffed the air even though the grill wasn't lit yet. "If I smell smoke, I will need to document it for management." "Karen," Emily said, still calm, "we'll keep it safe and kind. We'll clean up. We'll end by 7. We'd love for you to come and have a veggie burger. I made a special batch." For a second, just a second, Karen's face softened like a snowball under the sun. Then the pen clicked again. "I'll be observing," she said, and walked away. At noon, I realized the propane tank was low. "Uh-oh," I told Emily. "We might run out mid-burger." Our neighbor, Mike, the guy with the green truck and the laugh you can hear across the block, walked over. "Need a tank?" he asked. "I've got a spare." He rolled it over without asking for anything. "Pay it forward," he said. "That's the kind of street we live on. People help people. We watch each other's dogs. We bring soup when someone is sick. We wave." That morning, little Lily from next door came by with a plate of cookies she baked with her grandma. She wore pink sneakers and a shy smile. She tugged my sleeve. "Mr. Jason," she whispered, "can I put the cookies on the table?" "You can be our cookie captain," I said. "That's the most important job." At 2:30, Mr. Walker's daughter pulled up and helped him out of the car. The whole block clapped as he came through the gate. He held his cane steady and blinked fast like he might cry. "You all didn't have to do this," he said, "but I'm so glad you did." I hugged him careful. "You fixed my mailbox. This is the least we can do." I started the grill. The smell of ribs and burgers made the air feel like a holiday. Kids chased Scout around my apple tree. The music was gentle, a Motown playlist so smooth even the squirrels swayed. I wore my Kiss the Cook apron because Noah thinks it's funny. Emily handed out lemonade and reminded kids not to run on the wet grass. That's when Karen reappeared. She stood outside the fence, phone in hand, filming the yard through the slats like she was a nature photographer catching a rare bird. "Timestamp, 3:12 p.m., she muttered loudly so we could hear. "Open flame near a wooden structure." "It's a steel grill on a stone patio," I said, still smiling. "We have a fire extinguisher right here." Click. "Decibel level recording," she added. She opened a measuring app and held it high. The screen didn't break 55. Birds chirped louder. I looked at Emily. She looked at me. We both gave the same small shrug. Be kind anyway. That was our rule in life. People are heavy with things you can't see. Try kindness first. I carried a plate over to the fence. "We have veggie burgers," I told Karen again. "Tomato slices, pickles, toasted buns, best in town." She hesitated. I saw it. The part of her that was just a person on a warm Saturday. Then her jaw set. "I don't eat during investigations," she said. Mike walked by and winked at me. "Investigation of the century," he whispered. At 4, a gust of wind flipped the tablecloth. A stack of napkins took flight like white butterflies. Kids cheered and chased them. We laughed and picked them up. On my way back from the trash can, I saw Mr. Walker sitting with Noah, showing him how to fold a paper boat out of a napkin. "I learned this overseas when we didn't have toys," he said. "You make joy out of what you have." That's when the first small problem popped up. The grill flared for a second, just a quick whoosh when fat dripped. I lifted the lid, turned the heat down, and sprayed a little water on the edge. It sizzled and went quiet. Easy, safe, controlled. "All good," I said. From the other side of the fence, a voice rose. "Documented," Karen declared, still filming. "Open flame hazard." "Karen," Mike called over. "It's a grill. It's a BBQ." She kept filming. "Rules are rules," she said, but her voice shook just a little. Was she nervous or excited? I couldn't tell. At 5, kids lined up for ice pops. Emily cut watermelon into stars. I placed a new batch of burgers on the warm tray and called out, "Who wants cheese?" A cheer went up. Even the sky felt like it was smiling. And then something happened that showed why kindness matters. A new neighbor, Sarah, walked in slowly with a plate covered in foil. She moved like each step might break. She told Emily quietly that she was nervous around groups. She had just moved after a difficult year. Emily said, "You are safe here." She waved to Lily, who took Sarah's hand and said, "Want to be my cookie co-captain?" Sarah smiled for the first time. Her smile looked like a small light turning on in a dark room. I turned and saw Karen still outside the fence, still filming. For a heartbeat, her face softened again. She watched Sarah laugh with Lily and take an ice pop. Karen's pen stopped clicking. Her eyes looked tired. I almost walked over to her again. But the moment passed. At 5:20, the wind knocked the "Welcome Mr. Walker" poster off the inside fence. It fell outside the gate onto the sidewalk. I stepped out, picked it up, and pinned it back inside. When I turned around, Karen was standing closer than before. "You can't block the sidewalk," she said, even though nothing blocked anything. "And balloons attract wildlife." "Raccoons love a good party," Mike joked. Karen's lips pressed into a line. "You'll be hearing from the management company," she said. "There will be fines." I nodded. "We'll talk on Monday," I said kindly. "You're still welcome to have some watermelon." Her eyes flicked to the red bowl on the table. She didn't move. Then she stepped back and disappeared behind her hedge. I hoped that was the end of it. It wasn't. At 5:45, I heard my gate rattle. I turned and saw the latch bouncing like someone was testing it from the outside. "Everything okay?" Emily asked. "Probably Scout bumping it," I said, though Scout was asleep under the picnic bench. The latch rattled again, harder. The screw squeaked. Then the gate swung open. Karen marched into my yard like she owned the grass. She didn't knock. She didn't ask. She didn't stop at the private property sign on the inside of the gate. Her phone was up. Her chin was high. 3 more people followed her, 2 in polo shirts with the logo of the management company, and 1 man I didn't recognize carrying a clipboard. "Cease and desist," Karen said, loud and clear. "This event is in violation of HOA policy." This yard is now under inspection. Karen, I said, holding up a hand. You can't just walk into our backyard. This is our home. The man with the clipboard looked uncertain. Maybe we should just... Karen cut him off. No. We have to enforce. We have to set a precedent. Mike stepped forward, calm but firm. Ma'am, the gate was latched. You forced it. Documented, she snapped, filming his face. Aggressive neighbor behavior. Mr. Walker struggled to his feet. Let them have their day, he said, voice soft but steady. We're celebrating life here. Something in Karen's eyes flashed. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was a fear that if she let one good thing happen, a bad thing would follow. I'm calling 911, she said. There is a dangerous, unauthorized gathering. There are open flames. There is a safety risk. I took a breath. My heart beat slow and big. Karen, I said, keeping my voice level. Please step outside the yard. We can talk in the driveway on Monday with whoever you want. Right now, you are on my property without permission. I am acting under HOA authority, she said. HOA authority ends at my property line unless I invite you, I said. Please, step out. She lifted her chin and tapped her phone. Yes, hello, she said to the dispatcher. There's an emergency on Maple Grove Circle. I felt every set of eyes in the yard on me. The kids were quiet. Even Scout lifted his head. Emily squeezed Noah's shoulders and moved him behind her. Sarah held Lily's hand and whispered, It's okay. I stayed kind. That was my promise to myself. Karen, I said, I don't want anyone embarrassed. Please step out and wait on the sidewalk. We'll end at 7. It's almost 7 now. Karen walked farther in instead. She stepped over the cooler, brushed past the table, and planted herself by the grill like she could turn off the day with her stare. Everybody, leave, she shouted, waving one arm. Event closed. You'll all be fined. The man with the clipboard tried again. Karen, maybe we should... She didn't hear him. Or she didn't want to. The extreme moment was building, and we all felt it. You know that feeling when the sky turns heavy before a storm? It was like that. The air leaned forward. The music was already off. Even the wind stopped to listen. And then, from the end of the block, we heard it. The first faint wail of a siren. It grew louder, closer. 2 neighbors peeked out of their gates. A car door slammed somewhere. Another siren joined the first. Blue and red rolled over the fence like waves. The whole yard glowed. Karen's face lit up. She lifted her phone higher. Over here! She shouted again, voice bright and breathless. Here! The gate, still broken from when she forced it, hung open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. 2 police cruisers stopped right at my curb. Their engines hummed. The taller officer looked at the gate latch. The shorter one scanned the yard. Their eyes were serious, not angry, trained, careful. Every muscle in my body went still. The taller officer looked at the private property, no trespassing sign. He looked at Karen inside the fence, not outside. He looked at the broken latch. He looked at me, at Emily, at Noah, at Mr. Walker with his cane, at the kids clutching popsicle sticks like tiny flags. The shorter officer reached for his cuffs. Karen smiled like a person who finally found the last puzzle piece. Officer, she said, voice sharp and sure. Arrest him. He's the one. The shorter officer stepped forward. He reached toward a wrist. And the wrist he reached for was, We'll get there. But not yet. Before anything else happened, I thought about what I believe in. That you treat people like neighbors first, not like problems. That you give grace. That you speak truth and stay calm. That you show your kids the right way to act even when someone else acts wrong. That kindness is not weakness. It's strength with a soft voice. So I stood tall. I put the spatula down so my hands were empty and open. I took one step closer to the fence so the officers could see me clearly. I didn't shout. I didn't point. I didn't blame. I just said, Officers, welcome. This is my home. You can ask me anything. Karen took a half step toward the grill as if to block me from speaking. Her heel caught the edge of the patio stone. She windmilled her arms and bumped the lemonade table. Cups tumbled. Ice skittered across the ground like marbles. Kids squeaked and jumped back. Documented, she yelled again, even as she almost slipped. The man with the clipboard and the 2 management guys looked like they wanted the grass to swallow them. The taller officer lifted his hand in a slow, steady way, the kind that calms a herd. Everybody, take a breath, he said. One at a time. Karen tried to cut in front, waving her phone. Arrest. That's when the shorter officer did it. He moved with quiet speed. His hand came up, the metal cuffs glinting in the flashing lights. He reached for a wrist, and the wrist he reached for was not mine. It was... Sirens echoed, lights strobed, the gate creaked, My heart hit my ribs like a drum. The officer's hand closed. Click. And right there, with my whole neighborhood watching, with kids clutching empty popsicle sticks and grown-ups holding their breath, a pair of cold silver circles snapped shut. But whose wrist was inside them? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The officer's hand closed on the wrist, and for a heartbeat the whole world seemed to stop breathing. It wasn't my wrist. It wasn't Emily's. It wasn't Mike's or even Mr. Walker's. The silver cuffs snapped shut on Karen's own hand. Her face twisted from triumph to shock in less than a second. What are you doing? She stammered, her phone tumbling into the grass. Ma'am? The officer said calmly. You're under arrest for trespassing. You forced entry onto private property and refused repeated requests to leave. The yard gasped. Kids clutched their half-melted popsicles tighter. Emily pulled Noah close, whispering, It's okay. Mike muttered under his breath, Well, I'll be... and then stopped himself because the kids were right there. Karen's face flushed red as she tried to twist away. No, you don't understand. I'm with the HOA. I have authority. The taller officer shook his head. HOA rules do not override state law or property rights. You broke in. That's trespassing. But let me not race too far ahead. You need to understand how we got to this boiling point, because this wasn't just about one BBQ. It was years in the making. A battle between kindness and control, patience and pride. It all started the first summer we moved into Maple Grove Circle, 3 years earlier. Back then, Karen introduced herself with a smile that felt rehearsed. She brought us a welcome basket of store-brand crackers, 2 bottles of water, and a copy of the HOA rulebook with yellow sticky notes on the important sections. She pointed to one, section 4.6, grass height, not to exceed 3 inches. We pride ourselves on order, she said. I remember Emily smiling, thanking her politely, but when Karen left, she whispered, Did we just move into a neighborhood or a military base? At first, I brushed it off. Some people just like order. But over time, Karen's presence became heavier. She gave warnings for trash cans left out 5 minutes too long. She sent friendly reminders if your porch light bulb wasn't replaced within a day. Once she snapped a picture of Scout sitting in our front yard and emailed me with the subject line, Unsupervised animal violation. But here's the thing. I decided early on that I wasn't going to fight her with anger. That only feeds people like Karen. Instead, we fought with kindness. Every time she complained, we answered politely. Every time she clicked her pen like a judge's gavel, we smiled and offered cookies or lemonade. Kill her with kindness, Emily would say, and though it wasn't always easy, it worked more than you'd think. Sometimes Karen even looked like she didn't know what to do with kindness. Still, it didn't stop her. Over the years, she got bolder. She'd step onto people's lawns with her clipboard. She'd peek through hedges. She'd take pictures of kids' chalk drawings on the sidewalk and label them graffiti. So when we planned Mr. Walker's BBQ, we knew Karen would be a problem. What we didn't know was how far she'd take it. The day of the BBQ had started out so beautiful. Everyone brought something: potato salad, coleslaw, fruit trays, pies. Even shy neighbors who usually waved from a distance came over. The kids filled the yard with laughter, chalked hopscotch on the driveway, and ran relay races with Scout chasing behind. The first low moment came when the grill flared briefly, and Karen seized on it like a hawk. But when I put it out quickly, the laughter and music swept the tension away. Mr. Walker sat in the shade, watching kids play with paper boats he taught them to fold. It was the picture of community. People caring for each other. Strangers becoming friends. Then came the high moment that shook everything. The rattling gate, Karen storming in, and the call to 911. My guests froze, unsure whether to leave or stay. Emily's hand trembled on my arm, though her face stayed calm for Noah's sake. The scariest part wasn't just Karen's anger, it was how certain she looked that she was right. She truly believed her clipboard gave her more power than the word trespassing nailed on my fence. She believed the cops would march straight to me, slap the cuffs on, and shut down my party. So when the officer's hand snapped the cuff around her wrist, the entire block felt the shockwave. Karen gasped like the world itself had betrayed her. But I'll pause there, because that arrest didn't just happen out of nowhere. The truth is, the events of that day were only beginning. What happened after the click of those cuffs would tear open secrets in our neighborhood that had been buried for years. And trust me, you're going to want to see what happens next. The handcuffs clicked shut on Karen's wrists, and the sound was sharp enough to slice through the evening air. The gasps, the murmurs, the wide eyes of my neighbors, all of it hung in the tension like a balloon about to burst. But if you think that click was the end of the drama, you'd be wrong. It was only the spark. The real fire was just beginning. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on a dock. Wait, what are you doing? You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA secretary, this is my duty. Her voice shook with a mix of rage and disbelief. She tugged at the cuffs, but the officer held firm. The taller officer, the calm one, took a step forward. Ma'am, we gave you a chance to leave the property. You chose not to. You forced entry onto private property and that's a crime. HOA rules don't override state law. Karen's face reddened, her neck stiff. No, you don't understand. These people, they're breaking rules. They have balloons. They have open flames. They didn't give proper notice. Ma'am, the officer interrupted. None of that justifies trespassing. And right there, the low murmurs of the crowd shifted. People who had once stayed silent around Karen now whispered to one another. Some smiled quietly. Others shook their heads. And one voice, louder than the rest, came from the back. It's about time. The words rolled through the yard like thunder. They came from old Mr. Walker, cane in hand, his voice firm though his body leaned heavy on the stick. His eyes blazed, sharper than I had ever seen them. We've let this go on too long. Karen turned toward him as though struck. You don't understand. I was protecting you. Protecting me? Mr. Walker's laugh was bitter. From what? From neighbors who welcome me home? From children laughing? From kindness? The officer held Karen steady as she fumed, but I could feel the ground shift. The arrest wasn't just about Karen trespassing into my yard. It was the opening of a dam. People had held their tongues for years, afraid of her power, her fines, her letters, her endless reports to the management company. But seeing her in cuffs, red-faced and sputtering, gave people courage. And that courage was about to spill everywhere. But let's rewind a little, because you need to understand the weight of this moment. When Karen stormed into my yard earlier that evening, it wasn't the first time she had crossed a line. Oh no. There were years of history, a long trail of broken moments and soured gatherings. One Christmas, Emily and I had decorated our porch with white string lights, just white, nothing blinking, nothing flashy. Karen sent a letter with 3 pages of rules, claiming our light density was excessive. Excessive. Meanwhile, her own house was trimmed year-round with plastic flowers so bright they looked radioactive in the summer sun. Another time, Mike, the guy with the green truck, was fined $50 for leaving a basketball hoop in his driveway overnight. His teenage son Jordan had been playing with friends and forgot to roll it back. Karen took a picture at 6 a.m. and filed the violation. Jordan never played basketball in the driveway again. And then there was Sarah, the shy neighbor who'd just moved in. Her first week, she accidentally parked her car with one tire slightly touching the grass. Karen filed it as a landscape violation. Sarah cried that night. She told Emily later she felt like she'd moved into a prison camp instead of a neighborhood. For years we swallowed it. We told ourselves it wasn't worth the fight, that's what Karen counted on. But tonight was different. Tonight, the balance of power had shifted, and everyone felt it. The taller officer spoke again, keeping his tone measured. Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say. Karen jerked in panic. No, you don't understand. I was doing my job. I was protecting property values. Her eyes darted around the yard, searching for backup. You all want safe, clean neighborhoods. You all want order. But this time, no one nodded. No one backed her. Instead, voices began to rise, hesitant at first, then louder. She fined me for my mailbox being crooked. She threatened me over my garden gnome. She told my daughter her chalk art was vandalism. She yelled at my husband for mowing too early, then fined him for mowing too late. It was like opening a closet and letting all the skeletons tumble out. One by one, people who had kept quiet now shared their stories, and every story made Karen shrink a little more in the flashing red and blue light. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because behind all her bluster, I could see something else in her eyes. Fear. She wasn't just afraid of the handcuffs, she was afraid of losing control, and Karen thrived on control. Emily stepped forward then, her voice calm but strong. Karen, we invited you. We offered you food, a seat, friendship. But you chose to make yourself the enemy. Karen's lips trembled. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback ready. That was when the clipboard man, the one who had come with her, finally spoke. He looked at the officers, then at me. Listen, I work for the management company. We didn't authorize her to do this. She told us she needed us for a routine inspection. We didn't know she'd break into someone's yard. He shook his head slowly. We never should have come. The officers exchanged glances. The taller one sighed. We'll need statements from everyone here. But first, let's get her secured. They began leading Karen toward the gate. She struggled, shouting, "This isn't over. You'll all regret this." Her voice cracked with desperation. "I'll sue. I'll have your homes taken, you'll see. But the neighbors didn't flinch. For once, no one looked away. And then, just as they reached the gate, something happened that turned this whole night on its head. Karen twisted suddenly, trying to yank herself free, and stumbled into the lemonade table. The pitcher tipped. Lemonade cascaded across the grass, soaking into the ground. Cups clattered, rolling toward the kids' feet. Noah squeaked and jumped back as Scout barked in confusion. The crowd gasped. The officers tightened their grip, pulling Karen upright again. But when the table fell, something else fell too. Something no one expected. From Karen's handbag slung over her shoulder, a thick manila folder tumbled out. Papers scattered like leaves fluttering across the grass. And on those papers, bold letters caught everyone's eyes. Foreclosure filings, Maple Grove Circle. The yard went silent. Completely silent. Mike bent down, picked one up, and his face hardened. "What is this?" he asked, holding it up. I caught a glimpse. It wasn't just foreclosure filings. It was detailed reports about nearly every house on our street. Names, addresses, supposed violations, estimates of property values, and notes like potential grounds for forced sale. "What the?" Emily whispered beside me. The officers looked at each other. "Ma'am, what is this?" Karen's face went pale. That's nothing. That's just documentation for records." But it was too late. The neighbors surged closer, reading, pointing, gasping. "She's been collecting files on us? Look, this says I leave my lights on too long. What? This says my lawn isn't uniform enough. She put a note about my daughter's swing set. Visual clutter hazard?" The truth spilled out like the lemonade soaking the ground. Karen hadn't just been enforcing rules. She'd been building a private case against nearly everyone in the neighborhood, preparing to push families out if they didn't bend to her will. The taller officer frowned, lifting one of the papers. "This looks a lot more serious than a trespassing complaint." Karen's voice cracked. No. You don't understand. I was protecting the community. I was... But her words dissolved under the weight of angry voices. For the first time ever, the whole neighborhood stood against her together. And that's when the next extreme event hit. Because from the shadows at the end of the street, headlights appeared. A black SUV rolled slowly toward us, its engine humming low. The neighbors turned, murmuring. The vehicle stopped right by the curb, doors clicking open. Out stepped a man in a suit with a leather briefcase in hand. He wasn't from the neighborhood. He wasn't from the police. He looked around at the scene, the officers, the handcuffed Karen, the papers strewn across the grass, and smiled a cold smile. "Good evening," he said smoothly. "I believe those documents belong to me." The entire yard froze again, like someone had pressed pause on life. Who was this man? Why did he claim the papers? And what deeper secret was about to unravel? We'll get there, but not just yet. The black SUV's headlights dimmed as the engine cut off. The tall man in the suit adjusted his tie, grabbed the leather briefcase, and strode into the yard as though he owned it. Not a hint of hesitation, not a glance at the flashing police lights. His shoes clicked on the pavement like the sound of a gavel in a courtroom. Karen froze. Her body stiffened so suddenly that even the officers noticed. Her lips parted, but no words came out. "Good evening, everyone," the man said again, his voice calm, polished, the kind of voice that fills boardrooms. He extended a hand toward the papers scattered across the grass. "Those documents belong to my firm." The taller officer stepped between him and the papers. "And you are?" The man reached into his pocket slowly, producing a card. "Jonathan Price, attorney, representing the Maple Grove Homeowners Association." He let the name hang in the air like it explained everything. Neighbors murmured. Some exchanged confused looks, others crossed their arms. Mike, never one to stay quiet, barked, "If those belong to you, then why are our names and houses written all over them like targets?" He snatched up another sheet from the ground and waved it. "This says I owe excessive wear and tear penalties." "What is that even supposed to mean?" Jonathan Price smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides more than it shows. "Mr. Williams, correct? These are simply exploratory notes. Nothing more. Standard procedure for maintaining property values." "Property values?" Emily cut in sharply. "You're building files to push people out of their homes." Karen's face contorted. I was following instructions. I didn't mean—" "Silence," Jonathan hissed, just low enough for only those closest to hear. But I caught it. And so did the officers. The shorter officer frowned. "Sir, these papers were in this woman's possession. She's already under arrest for trespassing. If these belong to you, we'll need proof. And you'll have to explain why you're collecting private information about these families." Jonathan's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before his smile returned. Of course, officer. Everything I do is legal, but I would advise against spreading these documents around. Misinterpretation could lead to unnecessary panic. But the panic was already here. Sarah, the shy neighbor, bent down and picked up another sheet. Her face drained of color. This one says, subject vulnerable to financial strain, monitor for foreclosure leverage. That's me, that's my house. Her hands shook as she held it out. You? How do you know that? Price's smile flickered. Monitoring helps us protect the neighborhood from instability. Instability? Sarah's voice rose. You call me instability? I moved here to feel safe, to heal. And you? Her voice broke as tears welled in her eyes. Emily rushed to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. You are not instability. You are family here. And right there, the neighborhood shifted again. People who once whispered now spoke louder. Their anger grew bold. You tried to use our lives like numbers on a chart. You think we're just assets to squeeze? My daughter's chalk drawings aren't instability. My lawn isn't leverage. The officers stepped back slightly, letting the community's fury roar. Jonathan Price, however, remained calm. Too calm. He brushed invisible lint off his sleeve. Ladies and gentlemen, he said smoothly, I suggest you all calm down. These documents are protected. If you spread them, you may expose yourselves to liability. Liability, Mike thundered. Buddy, the only liability here is you walking into our block thinking you can scare us. Jonathan's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Careful. And then, just when I thought we had seen the peak, Karen broke. You said I'd never get caught, she shouted at Jonathan, voice cracking. You told me if I kept track of every violation, every mistake, you'd handle the rest. You promised I'd be respected. The yard went dead quiet again. Every head turned to Karen. Jonathan's smile snapped. For the first time, his mask cracked. He stepped closer, his voice low, dangerous. Shut your mouth. But it was too late. The damage was done. The taller officer spoke firmly now. Sir, you need to step back. We're taking both of you in tonight. The crowd buzzed with shock. Both? The thought lit sparks of hope in the air. Maybe this wasn't just about Karen anymore. Maybe the rot went deeper and tonight was the night to dig it out. Price stiffened, then lifted his chin. You don't have the authority. The shorter officer held up a sheet from the ground. This says otherwise. We'll let the station sort it out. He pulled his cuffs from his belt, stepping closer. Jonathan Price's eyes darkened. His hand tightened on his briefcase. And for a terrifying second I thought he might resist. But before anyone could move, before the cuffs could snap shut, another voice cut through the night. It was Mr. Walker. Steady. Clear. Stronger than I had ever heard him. Enough, he said, leaning on his cane, standing tall despite the tremor in his body. We've lived under fear too long. Tonight we take back our neighborhood. No more hiding, no more silence. The neighbors rallied behind him, their voices rising as one. No more silence. And just as the chant took hold, the briefcase in Jonathan's hand slipped open slightly. A corner of something inside glinted in the flashing lights. Not papers, not files. Something metallic. The crowd gasped. The officers' hands flew to their belts. The next extreme event had arrived. What was inside that briefcase? And why was Jonathan so desperate to keep it closed? The leather briefcase snapped open as Jonathan Price's grip faltered and time seemed to slow. Every neighbor's breath caught. The children clung to their parents. Even Scout, my golden retriever, stopped barking and crouched low as though he knew something was wrong. The metal glint from inside the briefcase was no trick of the light. It was real, shiny, cold, and terrifying. The shorter officer lunged forward, shoving Jonathan back with a sharp command. Hands up, now! Jonathan staggered, but his face didn't crack with fear like Karen's had. No, his lips curled into something worse, a smirk. He raised both hands slowly, deliberately, as though he was in control of the moment, not the police. The taller officer grabbed the briefcase, flipped it open on the hood of a police cruiser, and the truth spilled out in the harsh, red and blue glare. Not just papers, not just files. A handgun, a small stack of cash wrapped with a rubber band, more folders, thicker, stamped with the HOA's logo, marked, confidential, board use only. The yard erupted into shouts. You brought a gun into our neighborhood? Is that money bribe money? What's in those files? The taller officer quickly secured the gun, locking it into evidence. The shorter one grabbed Jonathan by the arms and pulled his wrists behind his back. The cuffs clicked tight. Jonathan Price, you're under arrest for unlawful possession of a firearm on private property. pending further investigation into these documents. Jonathan didn't flinch. He didn't fight. He only looked straight at Karen, who was already cuffed and trembling, and sneered. You fool. You couldn't even keep your mouth shut for one night. Karen shrieked, thrashing against the officer holding her. You told me this would work. You said the more violations I found, the more power I'd have. You promised me the board would make me president. The neighbors gasped again. President? Was that what this was about all along? Karen hadn't been driven by some twisted sense of duty. She'd been promised power, lured into this scheme by Price's silver tongue. Mike stepped forward, fury etched into his face. So that's it, huh? You two were planning to bleed us dry, house by house, until we either bowed down or moved out? Jonathan's smirk lingered even as the officer shoved him toward the cruiser. You'll never understand. HOA isn't about neighbors. It's about control, about money. And we had all the leverage. Emily's voice cut sharp across the yard. Not anymore. The officers shoved Karen and Jonathan into separate cruisers. The doors slammed shut. The sirens wailed once more, and the cars pulled away, leaving the neighborhood bathed in silence broken only by the sound of night crickets. But silence doesn't always mean peace. Because as the cruisers disappeared around the corner, the neighbors turned. Not on me, not on each other, but on the truth that had just been unearthed. Sarah clutched the file she'd picked up earlier, her hands trembling. They had information on us. On all of us. Look. She held it out, and a circle of people pressed close to read. Notes about debts, about who's behind on bills, about who has small cracks in their driveway or peeling paint. They were building a case to force foreclosures. Another neighbor, Tom, grabbed a page that had blown under the grill. This one says my wife's business is failing. How did they even know that? His face was pale. Have they been spying on us? The whispers grew into a storm. People pieced together the puzzle. Karen had been their watchdog, documenting every violation, every detail, feeding it to Price and whoever else sat behind those closed HOA doors. And those files weren't about order. They were about control, extortion, exploitation. Emily gripped my arm. Her voice was low but urgent. Jason, this goes deeper than Karen. If Jonathan Price is involved, there's more. This wasn't just her obsession. This was planned. I nodded, scanning the worried faces around me. The high moment, the arrests, had shaken everyone. But now came the low. Doubt. Fear. A creeping realization that their very homes, their sanctuaries, had been under threat for longer than anyone knew. Mr. Walker's cane tapped against the patio stone. Listen, he said, voice carrying strength despite his frail frame. Fear is what they wanted. Fear is how they controlled us. But tonight, we stood together. Don't let that fade when the cops drive away. The crowd hushed, every eye on him. His weathered face shone in the glow of porch lights and street lamps. I've fought in wars, seen real enemies. And I'll tell you this. The enemy is always weaker when neighbors stand side by side, you hear me? A chorus of murmured yeses followed, soft but growing louder. But just as the unity began to settle in, Sarah spoke again, voice shaky. There's something else. Look at this. She unfolded another sheet from the folder. At the top, bold letters read, Phase 2 Acquisition Targets. She read aloud. Projected foreclosures, 6 homes by end of year. Objective, resell to pre-arranged buyers. Profit margins, confidential. The yard erupted again, louder than before. They were planning to take our homes and sell them off? To who? Profit margins? We're not a business, we're people. Mike's fist clenched at his sides. We can't just sit back and hope the cops fix this. If there are more people like Price behind this, they'll bury it in court. Emily's eyes locked on mine. Jason, those files, those are evidence, we can't let them vanish. I looked down at the scattered papers, the grass littered with secrets, and I knew she was right. The officers had taken some, but not all. Enough remained to expose the entire scheme, if we were brave enough to act. The neighbors gathered closer, their faces lit with both fear and determination. And that's when the next extreme event struck. A car door slammed across the street. Not a police cruiser this time. A sleek silver sedan, engine still running. Out stepped a woman none of us had ever seen before. Dark hair in a tight bun, black blazer, heels clicking against the pavement. She didn't look like a neighbor. She looked like someone who belonged in an office tower downtown. She walked straight toward us, unbothered by the stares, and picked up one of the scattered papers as if it belonged to her. She read it, smiled faintly, and tucked it under her arm. Then she looked up, her voice smooth as glass. Those documents, she said, were never meant to leave our hands. I'll be taking them now. The entire block went still. a fresh wave of dread crashing over us. Who was she? Another lawyer? Another puppet master behind the HOA curtain? And how far did this conspiracy go? The silence was broken only by the sharp clack of her heels on the driveway as she stepped deeper into my yard. The woman's heels clicked against my driveway like a countdown. Each step tightened the knot in my chest. Neighbors shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between her and the scattered files. The air was thick, like a thunderstorm about to break. She bent down gracefully, lifted another sheet from the grass, and scanned it. A faint smirk played across her lips. Then she slipped it neatly into the black leather portfolio she carried under her arm. "I'll be taking all of these back," she said smoothly, her voice low but commanding. "They're confidential HOA property." Mike barked out a humorless laugh. "Lady, you think you can just stroll into our block after the cops hauled off your pals and clean up their mess? Not happening." The woman didn't even flinch. Her eyes, sharp as glass, scanned the group. "My name is Valerie Cross," she said, like the words should mean something to us. "I represent the board. Jonathan Price was one of our outside consultants. Clearly, he let things get messy." She adjusted her blazer. "I'm here to make sure nothing else gets out of hand." Emily stepped forward, her voice steady though her hands clenched at her sides. "Out of hand? You're covering up. Families are written down in those papers like they're cattle for auction. You call that protecting a neighborhood?" Valerie's smile was polite, almost rehearsed. "Mrs. Miller, wasn't it? You misunderstand. HOAs exist to maintain standards, to ensure everyone's investment holds value. Sometimes that requires hard decisions." Mr. Walker jabbed his cane against the ground, the sound cracking through the night. "Hard decisions? You mean stripping people of their homes? I fought for this country so families could have freedom. And you call this freedom?" Valerie's face flickered just slightly before she regained her composure. "With respect, sir, you don't see the bigger picture. If this community doesn't follow strict guidelines, property values plummet. One neglected yard, one loud party, one rusted mailbox. It spreads. And soon enough, your homes are worth half what they should be." "Worth?" Sarah's voice cracked. She clutched the paper still in her trembling hand. "You don't measure a home by its price tag. You measure it by the love inside, by safety, by laughter, by kids who can draw chalk flowers on the sidewalk without being called criminals." Neighbors murmured in agreement, their anger simmering into something stronger, solidarity. But Valerie wasn't finished. She tilted her head, her gaze like a scalpel. "Think carefully. If these files leave this block, if they're exposed beyond the HOA, there could be consequences. Legal action, financial ruin. Sometimes, it's better to let things settle quietly." She stretched out her hand toward Sarah, palm open, waiting for the sheet. And for a moment, Sarah looked like she might hand it over. She was trembling, vulnerable, tired from carrying her pain. But then Emily's hand rested firmly on her shoulder. "Don't you dare," Emily whispered. "Not this time." Mike stepped closer, squaring his broad shoulders. "Lady, you can't threaten us anymore. Not tonight." He bent down, scooped up 3 more papers, and held them high for everyone to see. "These belong to all of us now. You want them? You'll have to take them from the whole neighborhood." The crowd shifted, closing ranks, forming a wall of bodies around the files still scattered on the grass. Parents pulled their kids close. Neighbors who had once kept quiet now stood tall. Valerie's smile finally faltered. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said, my voice carrying over the murmurs. "The mistake was letting people like you convince us we were powerless." The taller officer, who had lingered near his cruiser after escorting Karen and Price away, stepped forward now, his presence commanding. "Ma'am," he said to Valerie, "these documents are evidence in an active investigation. You have no authority to remove them." Her eyes narrowed. "Evidence? Against who?" The officer's jaw tightened. "That's for the detectives to decide." Valerie's mask cracked again, just for a second, and I caught the fear behind her sharp eyes. She wasn't just here to collect papers, she was here to bury evidence, which meant the scheme was bigger than Karen, bigger than Price. Still, she straightened, her voice smooth once more. "Fine. Keep them. But don't say I didn't warn you when this community pays the price." She turned sharply, heels clicking back toward her car. But just before she slid into the driver's seat, she called out, "This isn't over, not even close." Then the silver sedan roared to life, taillights glowing red as it sped down the street and vanished into the night. For a moment, silence blanketed the block again. Only the chirp of crickets filled the air. Then Tom, usually quiet, always polite, spoke up. His voice shook, but it was firm. "She's right about one thing, this isn't over. If Price and Karen were just pawns, then who's really behind this HOA? That question hung in the air like smoke. Everyone felt it. Everyone knew the answer wouldn't come easily. But the fear that had gripped us hours ago was different now. It wasn't paralyzing. It was galvanizing. The neighbors looked at one another, not with suspicion, but with determination. Emily squeezed my hand. "We have to fight this," she said. "We will," I promised. Together. But just as the unity settled in, another sound cut through the night. A low rumble. The ground vibrated faintly. Headlights, multiple this time, glowing at the far end of the street. Not police cruisers. Not a single car. A convoy. 3 black SUVs rolling in formation, engines humming with authority. The neighbors froze, dread returning in a wave. Mike muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." The vehicle slowed to a stop right in front of my house. Doors opened in unison. Out stepped a group of men in matching suits, no badges, no uniforms. They looked like they belonged in a corporate skyscraper, not on Maple Grove Circle. One of them, tall with slicked back hair and a gold tie, surveyed the block with cold eyes. Then he spoke, his voice carrying like a warning bell. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've been busy tonight." The next extreme event had arrived. The 3 SUVs sat at the curb like dark beasts, engines still rumbling low. Their tinted windows reflected the flashing porch lights and the pale faces of my neighbors. Doors slammed in unison, and the suited men formed a line as if choreographed. The tall man in the gold tie took one slow step forward. His shoes crunched against the gravel with a weight that made the air tighten. He didn't hurry. He didn't need to. His confidence was the kind of confidence that comes from power. Real power. The kind you can't see but can feel. Behind me, Emily's grip on my arm tightened. "Jason," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Noah, pressed against her side, clutched Scout's collar with wide, frightened eyes. The man scanned the crowd, his gaze like a scalpel cutting through each of us. "My name," he began, his voice deep, calm, and steady, "is Richard Hale. I am the president of the Maple Grove HOA board." He let the words sink in like a stone dropped into a pond. "And I believe you have something that belongs to us." He gestured casually toward the scattered papers clutched in neighbors' hands, still glowing under porch lights. Mike stepped forward, his jaw set. "If by belongs to you, you mean the evidence that shows you and your people have been plotting to steal our homes? Yeah, we've got it. And you're not getting it back." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Fear, yes, but also agreement. For the first time in years, no one shrank back when challenged. Richard Hale's expression didn't change. He adjusted his gold tie, then clasped his hands behind his back. "You misunderstand. Those documents are sensitive internal material. They're not for civilian eyes. If you return them now, I can assure you this matter will disappear quietly." Emily's voice, calm but sharp, cut across him. "Disappear? Families almost disappeared because of you. How many people have you pushed out already?" Hale's smile was faint, almost pitying. "Mrs. Miller, families come and go, but property values remain. That is what keeps a community alive." Mr. Walker's cane slammed against the ground, the sharp crack silencing murmurs. His voice boomed, surprisingly strong for his age. "A community isn't alive because of numbers on a page. It's alive because of the people inside it. And you've been bleeding it dry." The suits behind Hale shifted, their stance tightening, like bodyguards waiting for a signal. "Mr. Walker," Hale said smoothly, "with respect, your service to this country is admirable. But you of all people should understand the importance of discipline. Order. Chain of command. Without it, chaos takes root." Walker raised his chin defiantly. "I didn't fight for chain of command. I fought for freedom. And freedom isn't yours to sell." The crowd stirred, emboldened. Murmurs grew louder. "He's right. We're not afraid anymore. They can't scare us." Hale's eyes flicked to the officers still lingering near their cruiser. "Gentlemen, this is HOA business. I'll take it from here." The taller officer stepped forward, shaking his head. "Not tonight. Those documents are part of an active criminal investigation. They're not going anywhere." Something shifted then. For the first time, Hale's composure cracked, just slightly but enough. His jaw tightened, and his eyes narrowed. "Officer," he said, voice still calm but edged with steel, "I suggest you reconsider. Interfering with HOA legal property could make your department very unpopular with City Hall." The officer didn't flinch. "My job isn't to be popular. My job is to enforce the law. And the law says trespassing, extortion, and fraud are crimes, no matter how nicely you dress them up." The neighbors erupted in cheers, clapping, shouting their support. The fear that once kept them silent was crumbling. But Hale didn't back down. He stepped closer, his gold tie glinting under the porch light. Do you really believe you can stop us with noise and paperwork? We are the HOA. We control the contracts, the banks, the management companies. You think Karen and Price were the top? They were nothing but pawns. Karen's name, spoken out loud, made several people shudder. Even though she was gone, cuffed and driven away, the shadow of what she'd done lingered. Hale's voice dropped lower, almost a growl. Return those files, or this entire neighborhood will regret it. The tension was suffocating. Children clung to their parents. Neighbors exchanged fearful glances. Even Mike, bold as he was, clenched his fists uncertainly. And then, it happened, the extreme moment that shattered everything. Sarah, trembling but fierce, stepped forward with her sheet still in hand. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but her voice rang out clear. No, we're done being afraid of you. She held the paper high. You see this? This is your weapon. But tonight it's ours. And before anyone could stop her, she tore it clean down the middle. The sound ripped through the yard louder than any siren. Gasps, shouts. Hale's face twisted, his calm mask shattering into raw fury. He surged forward, his bodyguards moving with him, until the shorter officer drew his weapon and barked, "Back, now!" The standoff froze the entire block. Neighbors behind Sarah stepped up, forming a human wall. Emily moved beside her, her hand on Sarah's shoulder. Mike flanked the other side, arms crossed like a shield. And then something extraordinary happened. One by one, neighbors raised the files they'd picked up, and one by one, they tore them in half, the ripping sound echoing like a chorus. Pages fluttered to the ground like broken wings. Hale's face grew red, his jaw tight as steel. "You fools!" he roared. "Do you know what you've done?" But the crowd wasn't listening anymore. For the first time, the power had shifted completely. Mr. Walker lifted his cane high, his voice strong and steady. "This is our neighborhood, not yours, not Karen's, not Price's, not yours." The cheer that followed shook the block. Hale stood frozen, his bodyguards tense at his sides. The officers moved in, their hands hovering over their belts. Hale's fury radiated like heat. But then he smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. "You think you've won," he said softly, almost too soft to hear over the cheering. "But this is only the beginning. We'll be back. And next time, it won't be papers you're tearing. It'll be your mortgages." He snapped his fingers, and his men turned in unison, retreating to the SUVs. Doors slammed, engines roared, and just like that, they were gone. Taillights glowing red as they disappeared into the night. The cheers faded into silence, the weight of Hale's threat lingering in the humid air. Emily turned to me, her eyes filled with both pride and fear. "Jason, what if he's right? What if they come back harder?" I pulled her close, my eyes sweeping over the tired but defiant faces of my neighbors. "Then we'll be ready. Because tonight we stopped being afraid." But deep inside I knew Hale's words weren't empty. He wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. And the next time he came, it wouldn't be with papers. The block stood in silence long after the SUVs disappeared, their taillights fading into the dark like vanishing threats. Neighbors lingered in tight clusters, whispering, holding their kids close, clutching the ripped pieces of paper that still fluttered on the grass. The night air was heavy, like it hadn't yet decided whether it was safe to breathe again. I bent down, picked up a half-shredded page and stared at it. The words blurred under the porch light, but one phrase stuck out clear as glass. Acquisition Phase 3, full transfer of assets. My stomach nodded. If Phase 1 was targeting families like Sarah, and Phase 2 was forcing foreclosures, what did Phase 3 mean? Full transfer to who? Emily touched my arm. "Jason, look at them." She nodded toward the neighbors. Their faces were tired, but there was something new in their eyes. A spark. Not fear. Defiance. Sarah wiped her tears and stood straighter than I'd ever seen her. "They want to take our homes, but tonight we showed them they can't take our voices. Not anymore." The neighbors murmured in agreement, but then Tom spoke, his voice edged with worry. "They won't stop with threats." Hale meant every word. "If they control the banks, the lawyers, the board, they can crush us." Mike clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Then we fight smarter. We've got the truth now. And we've got each other." The taller officer, who had been quietly gathering the leftover files, cleared his throat. "Folks, I'll be honest. I've seen a lot in my years, but this..." He lifted one folder labeled, "Confidential Phase 2 Strategy." "This isn't just HOA business. This looks like racketeering, fraud. Maybe worse. You all need to stay sharp, but more importantly, you need to stick together." His words carried weight. And for the first time, neighbors who had barely spoken beyond a wave or nod looked at one another like allies. Emily took Noah's hand and whispered, "Do you see this, sweetheart? This is what it means to be a community, people standing up for each other." Noah nodded, his small hand squeezing hers tightly. Scout wagged his tail, as if agreeing. But even as the warmth of unity spread through the crowd, the low settled in. Because when the officers finally left with what evidence they could carry, and neighbors began drifting back to their homes, the fear seeped back in like a draft under a closed door. Porch lights flicked on across the block, curtains twitched shut, and everyone knew this wasn't over. I spent that night lying awake, staring at the ceiling while Emily breathed softly beside me. Every sound outside, the creak of a branch, the hum of a car, set my nerves on edge. Hale's words echoed in my skull. "Next time it won't be papers you're tearing, it'll be your mortgages." Morning came heavy. The sun rose golden over Maple Grove Circle, but the warmth didn't chase away the unease. Neighbors gathered in small groups near mailboxes, clutching coffee mugs like shields. The usual chatter about lawns or weather was gone. Instead, voices whispered about strategy, about fear, about what came next. Mike knocked on my door around 10. His green truck idled at the curb. "Jason," he said, his tone grim but determined, "we can't wait for the cops to fix this. We need to meet. All of us. Tonight." That evening we crammed into my garage. Half the block, maybe more. Folding chairs scraped against the concrete. Kids sat cross-legged near the workbench, drawing chalk dinosaurs on the floor to keep busy. Emily passed around lemonade in paper cups, her smile thin but brave. Sarah spoke first. Her voice trembled, but her words were fire. "We can't live in fear anymore. We need to organize. We need to take back the HOA from the inside." Heads nodded, voices murmured agreement. Tom leaned forward. "But how? Hale runs the board. They've got lawyers, money, connections." Mr. Walker tapped his cane, commanding silence. "They may have the board, but we are the homeowners. And last I checked, homeowners still vote. If we unite, we can oust them, legally, publicly." It was like a spark hitting dry wood. Whispers turned into shouts of agreement. People who had felt powerless were suddenly talking about petitions, bylaws, emergency meetings. Emily's eyes lit up. "That's it. If we follow their own rules, we can beat them at their own game." But then Sarah unfolded another torn sheet she had salvaged the night before. "We'll need to move fast, because this says they've already scheduled a board meeting for next week. Agenda: finalization of Phase 3 acquisitions. If we don't act before then..." Her voice trailed off. The room went quiet. The weight of the deadline pressed down like a stone. That's when Mike slammed his fist onto the workbench. "Then we don't wait. We call an emergency town vote. Tomorrow night. We drag every neighbor out if we have to." The garage erupted into cheers. For the first time there was hope. But just as spirits lifted, headlights swept across the garage windows. Everyone froze. Scout barked. The shadows of two figures stretched across the driveway. Emily gasped softly. Who is that?" The garage door creaked as I opened it slowly. And standing there, framed by the glow of street lamps, were two strangers in dark suits. They weren't Hale's men from last night, but their faces were just as hard, just as cold. The taller one spoke, his voice flat and chilling. "We heard there's a gathering here tonight. You're in violation of HOA protocol." The entire garage went silent, hearts pounding. The next extreme event had arrived. The two men in suits stood at the threshold of my garage like shadows that had grown teeth. They didn't flinch at the sight of dozens of neighbors staring back at them. Their eyes swept across the room, calm and cold, as if they were measuring everyone inside, not as people but as obstacles. "Violation of HOA protocol," the taller one repeated, his tone sharp and calculated. "Unauthorized assembly, unauthorized use of private property for gatherings. You're all in breach." Mike stood before I could. He planted himself like a wall between them and the rest of us. "Funny. Last time I checked, Jason owns this garage, not the HOA. You don't get to tell us what we can do in here." The shorter man stepped forward, his jaw tight. "This isn't a debate. Disband this meeting, now, or face consequences." The neighbors murmured anxiously. Sarah clutched her cup so tightly it crumpled in her hand. Emily moved closer to me, slipping Noah behind her legs. Scout growled low, his fur bristling. But it was Mr. Walker, cane tapping against the concrete floor, who cut through the tension. "Son," he said to the taller man, his voice calm but hard as stone. "The last time someone told me to stop meeting with my own people, I was in a country halfway across the world, wearing a uniform. And I didn't listen then. I won't listen now." The room erupted in quiet murmurs of agreement. The neighbor's fear began to harden into resolve. The taller man narrowed his eyes. "You don't understand who you're dealing with." I finally spoke, stepping forward. "We understand just fine. You think intimidation will keep us in line. But last night proved you're losing control, and tonight, we're standing together." The taller man smirked. "Together won't save you from what's coming." His words sent a chill down my spine. But before I could respond, Sarah raised a trembling hand. "We're done living scared. If you're here to spy, go ahead. Tell Hale we're not backing down." The shorter man's lips curled into a sneer. "You think this ends with petitions and chants? Hale owns more than you know. He owns people in City Hall. He owns the banks. He owns your futures." Mike crossed his arms, unmoved. "Then maybe it's time somebody owned the truth, and we've got plenty of that." He gestured at the torn but salvaged files stacked on the workbench. For the first time, the taller man's composure cracked. His gaze flicked toward the papers. "Those documents are stolen property." Emily's voice rang out, fierce. "No, they're evidence. And if you touch them, you'll be obstructing justice." The tension reached a boiling point. The two men shifted closer, their shoes scraping the concrete, their intent clear. The neighbors instinctively formed a barrier, shoulders squared, eyes locked, voices low but strong. And then, the extreme moment broke. The taller man lunged. Mike intercepted him with a shove that sent the man stumbling backward into the driveway. Gasps filled the garage. The shorter one moved fast, grabbing for the files on the workbench. But before he could, Scout lunged with a growl, snapping his teeth just inches from the man's wrist. The intruder jerked back, startled. In that instant, neighbors surged forward. Tom slammed the garage door button, the motor whining as it began to lower. The two men scrambled back, retreating out of the garage just before the door slammed shut between us with a heavy, echoing thud. For a moment, silence filled the room, only the sound of heavy breathing, pounding hearts, and Scout's low growl. Then Sarah whispered, "They're not going to stop." Emily turned to me, her face pale but resolute. "Jason, if Hale has people in City Hall and the banks, this is bigger than we thought. They'll come at us from every angle." Mr. Walker tapped his cane again, steady as ever. "Then we don't just defend, we go on offense." Mike grinned grimly. "What are you thinking, old man?" Walker's eyes gleamed with the fire of someone who had stared down worse than this. "I'm thinking we don't wait for them to choke us with their rules. We expose them. Every file, every name. We go public." The garage erupted into murmurs. Fear, hope, determination. Every emotion twisted together. Some hesitated, worried about retaliation. Others nodded fiercely, ready to fight back. I felt the weight of every eye in the room turn toward me. I wasn't a soldier like Walker, or a fighter like Mike. I was just a neighbor who wanted to grill burgers in peace. But somehow I'd become the one standing at the center of this storm. "We take this to the press," I said, my voice steady. "To the news, to social media. If Hale owns the banks and City Hall, fine. But he doesn't own the people. He doesn't own the truth. And if the truth is loud enough, they can't bury it." Cheers erupted, echoing off the garage walls. For the first time, the fear was outmatched by fire. But just as the cheers swelled, a loud thud shook the garage door. Then another. A heavy pounding, deliberate and menacing. Neighbors froze. Scout barked furiously. The shorter officer, who had quietly lingered outside after last night's chaos, rushed in through the side door, his face pale. "They're not leaving," he warned. "There's more of them outside. SUVs, at least a dozen men. They're surrounding the block." The air turned electric, every neighbor stiffening as the pounding on the garage door grew louder. The next extreme event had arrived. The pounding on the garage door grew louder, harder, like a giant fist trying to punch its way in. The walls rattled. The kids screamed and buried their faces against their parents. Scout barked wildly, his paws scraping the concrete as he lunged toward the sound. Everyone froze. The neighbors, once buzzing with hope, stood locked in terror. My heart thudded against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then, bam! The entire garage door shook on its hinges. Dust rained from the ceiling. Mike clenched his fists. "They're gonna bust the door down." The shorter officer drew his weapon, his face hard and focused. "Everyone stay back. If they force entry, I'll hold them off." But Mr. Walker slammed his cane against the floor with a loud crack, his voice cutting through the panic like a blade. "No. This isn't just his fight. This is all of ours. They want to scare us back into silence, but we've been silent too long." The pounding stopped. Silence fell outside. Heavy, suffocating silence. Then came a voice, muffled but clear. Richard Hale's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've had your fun, but this ends tonight. Hand over the documents or we come in and take them. And when we do, there won't be a neighborhood left to save. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sarah clutched the last intact file to her chest. He means it, he'll tear everything down. I felt the weight of everyone's eyes again. Emily's, Noah's, the neighbors, the officers, all waiting for me to speak. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. No, I said, my voice steady though my hands shook. This doesn't end tonight. Not the way Hale thinks. If he wants a fight, he's about to learn what happens when neighbors stand together. Emily's eyes burned with pride. Mike stepped closer, his chest broad like a shield. What's the plan, Jason? The pounding resumed, harder, faster, relentless. The hinges creaked, the door wouldn't last. I glanced at the workbench, at the files stacked high, at the phones glowing in neighbors' hands. And it hit me. We go live, I said. What? Sarah blinked. We stream this, I explained quickly. Social media, news outlets, every channel we've got. If Hale wants to silence us, we make sure the whole world hears us before he can touch us. For a second, the neighbors hesitated. Then one by one, phones lifted. Screens glowed. A dozen live streams flickered on. Faces appeared across the country, across the world. Emily stood tall, her arm around Noah. Show them, she whispered. And so we did. I stepped to the front, holding one of the documents high. My name is Jason Miller. This is Maple Grove Circle. Tonight, our HOA board tried to strip us of our homes. They broke into our yards, they trespassed, they threatened, they filed to take everything from us. But we're not afraid anymore, and we're not staying silent. Cheers erupted behind me, neighbors shouting, raising their own ripped documents to the cameras. Sarah's tear-streaked face glowed with determination as she read aloud the line that labeled her vulnerable to foreclosure leverage. Mike thundered into the phone camera, waving his sheet like a flag. Even Mr. Walker lifted his cane to the screen, declaring, "This is our home, and no board owns it." The pounding outside stopped again. Silence. Then, bam. The garage door burst inward. The hinges screamed as the metal buckled. Hale's men poured inside, suits sharp, eyes hard. But when they saw what waited for them, dozens of phones live streaming, dozens of neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder, they faltered. Hale stepped in behind them, his gold tie glinting under the harsh garage light, his face twisted with fury. "What do you think you're doing?" I raised my phone higher, showing the world who you really are. And in that moment, thousands of viewers poured into our live stream. Comments scrolled fast. "Stay strong. Expose them. We're watching." Hale's composure cracked. His men shifted uneasily. The officer raised his weapon. The neighbors roared, their voices echoing in the small space. "This is our neighborhood. You won't take our homes. No more silence." Hale's eyes darted to the glowing screens, to the faces of people watching across the country. His jaw clenched. He realized it. He couldn't bury this. Not now. Not ever. He turned sharply, barking at his men. "Out, now." One by one, they retreated. The SUV's engines roared to life, tires screeching as they sped away into the night swallowed by the dark. The garage exploded with cheers, hugs, tears. Phones still streamed as neighbors wept into each other's shoulders, laughter and relief mingling with exhaustion. Sarah dropped into a chair, clutching her chest. "We did it. We actually did it." Mr. Walker raised his cane like a victory flag. "No. We did it. Together." Emily kissed Noah's forehead, whispering, "You'll remember this, sweetheart. You'll remember what it means to stand up for what's right." I lowered my phone, my voice breaking with emotion as I ended the stream. This is just the beginning. Tomorrow we take the board down officially, but tonight we prove that neighbors are stronger than fear. The cheers rose again, shaking the walls, drowning out the echoes of Hale's threat. And for the first time in a long time, Maple Grove Circle wasn't afraid. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from.